In this exercise, we're going to take a look at two remaining lens correction options, specifically lens vignetting and chromatic aberration. Now, I have opened that corrected version of interiorpool.dng found inside the 24 camera RAW folder. And I've already switched over to the lens corrections panel, and I've clicked on the manual tab so that I'm seeing these manual adjustment options. If you drop all the way down to the bottom, you'll see lens vignetting. And the idea here, the vignette is a darkness around the perimeter of the image. Typically, it's a darkness. It's a shadow that's cast by the lens onto the image. But it could also be an unnatural highlight around the perimeter of the image as well. And you're going to see that shadow or highlight in the corners. So it's almost like this big radial gradient starting from the corners and fading away to the interior. Now, as often as not, you see people add vignettes to their image. So frequently, folks will use this lens vignetting option down here to add a vignette effect. And I have to say, I personally frown on that technique. I'm not a big fan of artificial vignettes. And in fact, this option was designed to get rid of vignettes, not to add them. But you can do whatever you want. Anyway, I'll just show you how it works. I'm going to increase the amount value because in the case of my image, we do have some dark vignetting around the circumference of the image. So I'll increase that amount value to, let's say 60. Actually works out pretty well. Midpoint allows you to shove the effect outward or inward if you want to. So if you shove the effect inward, you're going to apply a lot more lightening to the image because you're extending the lightening effect toward the center of the image. If you shove it outward with a higher midpoint value, then you're going to get less of a lightening effect. Anyway, I'm just going to leave it set to about 50%. That works out pretty nicely for this image. However, for those of you who are vignette enthusiasts and you want to add vignettes to your image, then you go ahead and reduce the amount value so that you get this hideous effect. What is the attraction? I do not understand. Anyway, I'm going to reset amount back to 60 because vignettes are bad and I want to get rid of them. All right, we have the option, however, of applying post-crop vignette effects inside of Camera Raw 6. So I will be showing that to you. But for now, let's stick to the corrective techniques. I'm going to go back to sansimeonpool.dng. And I'm going to zoom in on this facade, this distant facade in the background here. And as I zoom in, you're going to notice, even if you've never heard this term before, you're going to notice the effect. It's chromatic aberration. And see how we have these colors that are just absolutely out of alignment with each other. Right along the top of this facade, you can see that we have a magenta edge, and then below, we have this kind of cyan edge. What in the world's happening there? Well, the colors are out of alignment toward the perimeter of the image. So this is another perimeter effect. As opposed to the lens casting a shadow or creating an unnatural highlight, however, this time, the lens is distorting the color slightly. So when the image is interpreted and demosaicked and converted from the linear raw data into the independent RGB channels, well, that information isn't aligning quite right. And it should be, with any luck, it's aligning just fine toward the center of the image because that's where the light is best focused. And it's going out of alignment toward the perimeter. And we can fix for this effect inside of Camera Raw. And actually, we can do a brilliant job. Camera Raw is very good at this, using these chromatic aberration options. Oftentimes, the big problem is knowing which slider to use. It's usually going to be a combination of the two, but is this a red cyan fringe? It's actually kind of magenta and cyan, I'd say. Or is it a blue-yellow fringe? Well, it doesn't look blue and yellow, so it looks more red cyan. And then finally, do we move the slider triangle this direction, or do we move it the other direction? What's going to end up giving us the best effect? Well, it looks like, where this image is concerned, the effect gets worse if I drag the slider triangle to the right, and it gets better if I drag the slider triangle to the left. Here's another technique you should know about, and this is a top secret trick. Really helpful, I find. You press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, and you drag this slider triangle. Now, it doesn't look like much of anything is happening back there in the larger image window, but we're basically distilling the image to just reds and cyans, and as soon as that edge, the edge in question, the edge that's offending us here, as soon as it turns nice and neutral, or as neutral as possible, then we're losing that fringe effect. We're losing the chromatic aberration. And at about -40, I'm seeing a pretty neutral edge going on there. And I'm looking at the top of that triangle, once again, the triangular facade. And I'll go ahead and release. And that looks like it takes care of the effect pretty nicely. then we might as well toy with this fixed blue-yellow fringe too, because there may be another fringe we're not really aware of. And so if I drag this option, I'm pressing the Alt key as I do this, the Option key on a Mac. If I drag this slider triangle all the way to the right, then I'm definitely exaggerating whatever effect I had. If I drag it over to the left, it's going to start getting bad as well if I go too far. But at about -5, so this is a pretty subtle effect, I'm seeing a fair amount of neutrality along the top of that facade. So I've got a red cyan fringe value of -40 and a blue-yellow fringe value of -5. And let's get a sense of what we've done here. I'll go ahead and turn the preview checkbox off. This is the original fringed edge here, the original chromatic aberration. And this is the reduced effect. Now, you may have noticed that the scene seems to be jumping up and down a little bit. I'll go ahead and zoom out a click here. And that's because Camera Raw is actually rotating the various color channels into alignment with each other. So it is changing the orientation of the scene a little bit. So again, this is the before version of the image. Notice it's kind of catawampus as well. And you can see these alarming color fringes going on, magenta and cyan. And this is the corrected version of the scene, thanks to the just infinite power of manual lens corrections here inside of Camera Raw.